December 7th, 1941, a date that President Franklin D. Roosevelt would later describe as a date which will live in infamy. The tranquil waters of Pearl Harbor, a lagoon harbor on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, were disrupted by the thunderous roar of war as the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack. This serene Pacific paradise was transformed into a fiery cauldron of destruction, marking a pivotal moment during the Second World War. In the early morning hours, Japanese fighter planes swooped down on the unsuspecting U.S. Pacific Fleet. The attack was swift, brutal, and devastating. It not only shook the American nation, but also fundamentally altered the trajectory of the war. The United States, which had maintained a position of neutrality, was abruptly and violently thrust into the heart of global conflict. This surprise attack pushed the United States onto a path that would forever change the course of history. The attack on Pearl Harbor didn't occur in a vacuum. It was the culmination of rising geopolitical tensions between the United States and Japan. To fully understand the reasons behind this surprise attack, we need to delve into the complex political landscape of the early 20th century. The United States and Japan were on a collision course, fueled by diverging interests and clashing visions for the Pacific. Japan, eager to become a dominant force in Asia and the Pacific, was on an expansionist drive. Its eyes were set on territories in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. The U.S., however, saw these territorial ambitions as a threat to peace and stability in the region. In response to Japan's aggressive expansion, the United States imposed economic sanctions and embargoes on the island nation. The U.S. halted oil exports to Japan, a move that severely crippled the Japanese economy and its military prospects. The embargoes were a clear message to Japan: halt your expansion or face the consequences. But Japan was not ready to back down. In the midst of these rising tensions, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was stationed in Hawaii, a clear and present deterrent to Japan's expansionist agenda. The fleet was perceived by Japan as a significant obstacle to its plans. This was not just about military might, it was a symbol of American opposition to Japanese ambitions in the Pacific. As the geopolitical chess game unfolded, the United States and Japan were locked in a tense standoff. Diplomatic negotiations were attempted, but to no avail. The United States insisted on Japan's withdrawal from China and Indochina, a demand that Japan staunchly refused. On the surface, it appeared as though peace talks were ongoing, but behind the scenes, Japan was preparing for a different kind of dialogue. This growing tension set the stage for the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. It wasn't just an unprovoked act of aggression, but the desperate lashing out of a cornered nation determined to pursue its ambitions at any cost. The echoes of this monumental event still reverberate in our collective memory, a chilling reminder of the perils of unchecked ambition and the tragic cost of war. In the early morning hours of December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircrafts descended upon Pearl Harbor. The tranquility of the Hawaiian morning was shattered, the sun barely peeking over the horizon as the first bombs began to drop. The attack was meticulously planned and expertly executed. The Japanese had divided their forces into two waves, each with specific targets in mind. The first wave of 183 planes, led by Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, took off from 6 aircraft carriers stationed about 270 miles north of Oahu. Their mission: to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet at anchor. As the first wave approached, the U.S. forces were caught off guard. Many of the Pacific Fleet's battleships were lined up along what was known as Battleship Row, an easy target for the Japanese torpedoes and bombs. The USS Arizona was one of these. A bomb struck her magazine, causing a massive explosion that engulfed the ship and sank her in just 9 minutes, taking with her over 1,000 of her crew. Over at the airfields, the scenario was just as grim. The Japanese had strategically targeted these areas to prevent any aerial counterattacks. Rows of American planes were neatly lined up, making them easy targets. Within minutes, the majority of the U.S. planes were either destroyed or severely damaged. The skies were dominated by Japanese aircraft, their distinct red sun insignia, a stark contrast against the bright Hawaiian sky. Meanwhile, the second wave of fighters, a force of 171 planes, was already in the air. Their mission: to finish what the first wave had started. By the time they arrived, the U.S. forces had started to mount a defense, but it was too little too late. The damage was already done. Throughout the attack, there were stories of courage and resilience. Sailors and soldiers, despite the chaos unfolding around them, fought back with everything they had. Men like Lieutenant John Finn, who manned a machine gun and continued firing at the incoming Japanese planes despite being wounded multiple times. Or Doris Miller, a cook on the USS West Virginia, who took over an unmanned machine gun and fired until he ran out of ammunition. Their stories, and many others, highlight the bravery and tenacity of the American forces during this unprecedented attack. When the dust finally settled, the devastation was clear. 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 destroyers were either sunk or heavily damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed, and another 150 damaged. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and another 1,100 were wounded. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but in that short time, the U.S. Pacific Fleet had been drastically altered. The day that started like any other had ended in tragedy and chaos. A powerful force had been crippled, and a nation had been thrust into a war that would change the course of history. But let's not forget, amidst the ashes and the wreckage, the spirit of the American forces remained unbroken. They rallied, they rebuilt, and they fought back. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a devastating blow, but it was also the spark that ignited a nation's resolve. In less than 2 hours, the face of the U.S. Pacific Fleet had been drastically altered. The events of that day would reverberate through history, a stark reminder of the cost of war and the courage of those who fight it. The immediate aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor was marked by shock and loss. On that fateful morning, thousands of lives were forever altered. The official count revealed that 2,403 Americans, both military personnel and civilians, lost their lives. More than 1,000 were wounded, left to bear the physical and emotional scars of the attack. In terms of material damage, the toll was equally devastating. 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 destroyers were either sunk or heavily damaged. Nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed. Their remains a stark reminder of the aerial assault. The naval base itself, once a bustling hub of activity, was left in ruins, its infrastructure crippled by the onslaught. The shock of the attack reverberated across the nation. News of the devastation reached American homes through radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines, painting a grim picture of the destruction. The attack, carried out on a quiet Sunday morning, had caught the nation off guard, shattering the illusion of safety and invulnerability. Yet, in the face of this tragedy, the American spirit proved unyielding. The attack on Pearl Harbor had a rallying effect on the American public. In the shadow of loss, unity emerged. A sense of patriotic duty swept across the nation, transcending regional, political, and social divides. Men and women, young and old, were united in their resolve to respond, to stand up against the aggression. The attack on Pearl Harbor sparked a fervor for involvement in the war. It served as a catalyst, transforming a nation that had been divided over the issue of entering the war into a united front. It ignited a fire within the American people, a fire that would fuel the nation's efforts throughout World War II. In the face of adversity, the American spirit shone through. The attack unified the American public, sparking a fervor for involvement in the war. Opening, the attack on Pearl Harbor marked a definitive end to American isolationism. For years, the United States had been watching the world's conflicts from the sidelines, maintaining a policy of neutrality. However, the events of December 7, 1941, changed everything. On the following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. With a firm voice, he pronounced December 7th as a date which will live in infamy, and declared war against Japan. This was not a decision taken lightly. The president's words echoed the shock and anger felt across the nation. The surprise attack had killed over 2,000 American soldiers and civilians, and left the Pacific Fleet in ruins. The sense of betrayal was profound. The United States, which had been at peace with Japan, was now at war. But the declaration didn't stop there. Within days, Germany and Italy, as allies of Japan, declared war on the United States. The country was now fully immersed in the global conflict of World War II, fighting on multiple fronts. The attack on Pearl Harbor had a profound impact on the American psyche. It shattered the illusion of invulnerability that the nation had held. The United States was no longer an observer, it was an active participant. The nation rallied together, driven by a common purpose: to fight and win the war. Citizens from all walks of life stepped up to contribute to the war effort. Factories were transformed into war production plants, churning out tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. Young men enlisted in the military, ready to fight for their country. Women took on roles in factories and offices, filling the gaps left by men who had gone to war. The United States had entered a new era. An era defined not by isolation, but by a collective will to fight, defend, and uphold the values the nation held dear. It was a time of change, of challenge, and of resilience. Closing, the attack on Pearl Harbor marked the beginning of a new era for the United States. The attack on Pearl Harbor had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the immediate devastation. It was a defining moment that transformed the United States from a nation at peace to a key player in a global conflict, rapidly accelerating its emergence as a world superpower. The nation's economy underwent a seismic shift, transitioning from a peacetime economy to a wartime one. Industries that were once focused on consumer goods now churned out weapons and military equipment, fueling the war effort and stimulating economic growth. Moreover, the attack served as a brutal wake-up call, leading to significant changes in U.S. military strategy. Lessons were learned from the surprise assault, particularly the vulnerability of naval bases and the crucial role of air power. These lessons influenced the development of future U.S. naval and air strategies, emphasizing the importance of advanced warning systems and air superiority. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a catalyst for change, shaping the future of U.S. naval and air strategies. The attack on Pearl Harbor is a pivotal moment in American history. This event, seared into our collective memory, represents a turning point, a moment when the trajectory of a nation changed forever. The assault on that fateful December day in 1941 propelled the United States onto the global stage of World War II, irrevocably shaping the course of the 20th century. The legacy of Pearl Harbor is far-reaching and profound. Each year, memorials and remembrances take place, ensuring that the event and its impact are not forgotten. These commemorations not only honor those who lost their lives, but also serve as poignant reminders of the cost of war. The echoes of Pearl Harbor continue to resonate, influencing military strategies, informing foreign policies, and shaping our understanding of resilience and unity. As we remember Pearl Harbor, we are reminded of the sacrifices made and the lessons of history we must never forget.